Hello and welcome to another reading diary, this time for a new book completely independent of Wheel of Time because that's normally when I do diaries on Thursdays, but for the next few months at least, I'm going to be doing one diary a month on this absolute juggernaut that you definitely saw in the title and the thumbnail, Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, a book that I've had quite a journey with so far, reading it not that far through. Well, I suppose I've made a decent chunk. I'm around 127 pages in the normal paperback copy. And it's actually been really good so far. It's been, dense in some places, complex or complicated, or hard to really understand or put together in some other places. But many, many times I've found myself just having a good time and found it to be very enjoyable and surprisingly easy to read at points too. It's definitely surprised me a lot. I wanted to join a read along that several of my friends had for the book about a year ago, a little over a year ago at this point. They started reading it, I believe, in April of 2023. Some of those people didn't finish it, but some of them finished in a couple of months. Some of them took a few months longer. And I decided then, because they planned on doing that in April, back in January or February of 2023, they were making that plan. I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll join if I'm able, but I don't know. And eventually I just had to come to the conclusion, say, no, I'm not going to be able to join. It's not happening, but I would like to read it in the summer of 2024. Who else would like to join? And several of the friends who, like me, were not able to join for that first read along have kind of started to join me for this as a sort of buddy read. Some of those people haven't quite started yet, but I and at least a couple of other folk have, and there are a couple people still working through it who started it way before us. It is definitely one of those books. That said, I started reading this, I believe, on the 19th of April. Yes, I started it on the 19th of April, read it each weekend. No, actually, I didn't start it until the 20th because the 19th was a crazy morning and I didn't get to read it that day. So I've gotten 5 mornings worth of reading in Infinite Jest and gotten 130 pages in, basically. Well, when you include all of the footnotes or the endnotes stuff that I've read, it's more like 140 pages or so that I've read. For 5 days, that's actually pretty good. That's a lot quicker than I was anticipating. That's close to a 30-page average per day, where I was anticipating or had scheduled out my reading for this book to take maybe, a few months. I have it scheduled even now through the end of September, just in case it takes that long to work through. But that pace basically would have required me to read about 15 to 20 pages a day, and even that I was pretty scared of going in. But now that I've been able to read pretty consistently 30 pages a day whenever I've been able to read it, it's been going well. And I must say that I've really, really enjoyed it. There's been some stuff that hasn't hit yet, and most of what I've read is expositional, and I think I've only gotten, I think I've still got quite a bit of exposition more. I think people say it doesn't really pick up and things don't truly start to come together until, 250 pages in. So I probably still have another 100 to 120 pages or so maybe of exposition and introducing plot lines and stuff to go. So still quite a bit to work through before I'm well on my way. But as of these first couple weeks of reading, I gotta say, like I said, I've been really, really enjoying it. A lot of this stuff has hit. There have been several scenes that have been super impactful and super memorable. I've found the prose to be incredibly good, especially insofar as Wallace has been able to differentiate the prose between different POVs, and not just the different POVs, but also the different characters within dialogue. There are certain characters who talk certain ways, and the way that those POVs are handled and the way the characters talk compared to their internal monologuing in the POV, and then some other stuff that is a little bit more external. The best example that I can give to really, really sell how well he wrote the prose is in chapter 2. And for those who are joining this video and haven't read the book, and especially those who might be considering joining me as I continue through the book, let me just let you know here real quick, if I could find, a good example. You'd think it'd be easier because these early chapters are all relatively short. Each chapter is denoted by this little eclipse circle looking thing there on the page. Even in the ebook version, the chapters are formatted like that. So there's 28 chapters in the book. Yes, only 28 chapters for this behemoth. But you know, that heading that you would have just seen under there, for example, in this one, these headings denote the chapter titles, but you'll see some of these throughout chapters without this dot. That's because those are sub chapters. So that's kind of the way it's split out. It's split out into 28 chapters. The first half of the book comprises most of those chapters, and I think it's actually more like the first quarter contains, you know, the majority of those chapters. So like the first little bit is comprised of a lot of little ones, and they just kind of get bigger as the book goes on. Anyway, regardless of where the chapters and stuff start in the book and how the chapters are split throughout, one of the great examples of how Wallace does his prose and is able to differentiate it is if you pick, you know, any random example from the book and the POVs, they're different from most of the rest, but chapter 2 in particular is from the mind of a drug addict who is battling the addiction and battling his thought process through that entire, you know, battling that thought process through the entire chapter. The chapter's about 10 pages and comprised of only 2 paragraphs. Surprisingly, those 2 paragraphs are very easy to read, despite being like pretty, you know, just flow of consciousness. I forget what that term is called. It's very surreal to read that thought process, and the fact that it is only 2 chapters sounds really scary, but like flows surprisingly easily, and is also deeply relatable in how certain aspects are come across, even if you aren't somebody who struggles with addiction or who has struggled with addiction, or somebody who may not even know anybody who's really addicted to anything. It was super compelling read. As it stands, let me double check and make sure I'm speaking of this properly and confirm for you real quick. I believe I am through 11 of the 28 chapters and only 125 pages into the main book, so that kind of tells you how short these chapters are early on in the book. There's several that are just a couple pages, for example. I'm looking forward to longer chapters and seeing how well I do with just stopping in the middle at different points. I was able to do that the other day because chapter 11, well, the other day being 2 days ago, because chapter 11 was, or yesterday, I guess, at the time that I'm recording this. It was several days ago at the time you're watching this. Chapter 11 is 40 pages long, and like that's well above my average, and there is a big footnote or end note and plenty of complex stuff that was going on. Well, not really complex, just some density in some of that material that made it hard to push through all of it. So I got halfway through the chapter and had to stop and finish the rest of it this morning. But either way, 11 chapters through the book, so there's quite a bit to discuss as far as things are concerned. I haven't been taking proper notes on this book the way that I normally do, like for the Wheel of Time diary stuff, but there have been plenty of memorable moments, and I am going to go through and try to find some of my chapter notes that I've been making in Discord for a couple of friends as I've worked through, and just kind of tell you what my experience has been like. I've kind of rambled on for several minutes at this point, what my experience has been like in an as spoiler-free a context as I've been able to manage. And I'm sorry if part of this seems like kind of a rehash from Sunday's video, The Last Fortnight on the Isle, where I mostly said some of the same stuff starting off. When I talked about Infinite Jest, I rambled about that one for a few minutes in that video, but that's basically all that I think I really need to say for the spoiler-free of this. If you want to join along reading this book, I have it planned out for several months, so like if you don't get to start it for a little bit, you can totally start it, you know, anytime this summer, and you'll probably still finish it before me, truth be told, and you can come and check back with these videos a little bit later. I'll continue to be doing some of these spoiler-free stuff at the beginning of the videos for a couple minutes before I jump into spoiler talk. But I do want to discuss this video, or in these videos, in these diaries, with a little bit of spoilers to like kind of wrap my head around some things, to try to discuss like some theories that I'm having, some interpretations that I'm making of the text, and overall just trying to have a good time with this experience and have something to look back on if I were to, say, decide to reread the book. Because even with just as little as I've read so far, I want to reread this book sometime in the future. If the whole thing really works for me, this book would make a hell of a rereading experience. And if you are Patrick, one of my other friends, basically the reason that so many of us have been reading Infinite Jest as of the last couple years in the first place, because he read it relatively recently, and he likes to shove his recommendations down everybody's throats, and I mean that in the kindest way possible. It's actually rather fun. but he's rereading this soon. He's gonna pick this up and do a reread with some of us pretty shortly here, and I'm really excited to kind of see how discussion goes on that front. He'll definitely finish before me either way. That said, I'm finally going to jump into some spoiler talk. I'm going to try to find some of my thoughts on early chapters, so I have a little bit more of a coherent, more coherent thoughts going on in this video. This spoiler section will take place over the first 130 or so pages of the book. Like I said, the first 11 chapters. If you take the actual percentage of the book, the page that I'm currently on divided by all the pages, and this will include all the pages with the endnotes, is about 12% of the way through the book. So keep that in mind as you're watching. I'm going to be jumping back and forth between different stuff and mentioning different things. So if you haven't read through that much of the book, you might as well click off. And now, for the spoiler section of my first Infinite Jest diary, let's talk about the early chapters, which I thought were splendid and superb. The first 2 chapters were what I read, I believe, the first morning that I read the book, and they were great. They were amazing. I'm just now realizing as I'm beginning the spoiler section that I have no idea really how to talk about this book and really how to begin. Like, I've started talking about this first chapter multiple times and like kind of had a hard time coming up with what to say. And as I've started to say stuff, my mind's kind of gone back and forth between different things already. And like I've had to restart certain sections because I've had to make notes of things to include earlier in the video that I forgot to, and like I'm just kind of a mess at the moment. I've forgotten completely where I left off in terms of what I was talking about, so I'm just restarting. Chapter 1 starts off throwing you right into the mind of Hal and Cadenza, the primary main character of the book as it seems right now. I think there will be multiple main plot lines. Basically, I think there will be multiple major arcs, multiple major characters that we're following, but Hal seems to be the primary one. He's the one that's come back the most as of the point that I've been reading. So in the first 12% or so of the book, he's the one that has had the most POVs and the most chapters. One of the things to note when you're reading this book, now I'm actually remembering this is where I stopped, the timeline isn't exactly certain. It's not 100% explained to you when everything has happened. You sometimes get a month and a day with certain scenes and certain chapters, but the years of when things happen isn't set in stone. In this version of America, there's a point where something called subsidization, I believe, is put in place where the years are no longer numbers, like 1999 being the year 1999, and then you have a year in America, presumably in the 2000s or so, somewhere in this decade, it seems like, just based off of one of the endnotes that we get to in chapter 8. So like that's a major thing that happens, that like, you know, you kind of get through and you kind of piece together some of the years of when certain stuff might be when certain stuff might be occurring. But like basically you have like some of these years in the 2000s that are named year of the insert certain, you know, certain corporate item, I guess you could say. It's like a sort of a satirical take of the corporatization of America. So most of these chapters are year of the dependent adult undergarment, which is some year in, you know, in the future. I assume like it's sort of later in the timeline because most of these chapters take place in this year. So it seems like this is kind of where like the plot culminates, is somewhere in this, approximately around this time, or at least like you can tell it's a little bit later in the timeline because there's some other chapters with a different title that are definitely several years earlier than this one. So you're piecing together when things are happening. Anyway, this first chapter seems to be a little bit later in the timeline. I think Hal is like Hal is trying to be instated or recruited into a college for tennis, because basically where he's been doing school his whole life is at the Enfield Tennis Academy. You know, a school system where kids do school and play tennis, especially. That's like the thing that they do. That's most of where the setting is at the tennis academy up at this point. So like that's an interesting type of setting. I think Wallace speaks from personal experience with some of this stuff because he experienced a lot of like drug stuff, and addiction is a big part of this book. You get a lot of tennis stuff, and like I'm pretty sure Wallace did tennis when he was in school as well. I don't know to what degree he played, but I'm pretty sure that was part of his background and how he can speak about it so deeply in this book. Anyway, Hal is basically trying to be recruited into this tennis college, I believe, by his uncle, who we kind of learn a little bit later, seems to run the tennis academy at this point in time. So like there's some familial stuff going there, but a lot of this is Hal getting into there. You get like some hints at some stuff with Hal's character. Some of it is that like he's very clearly autistic. This was something that I kind of put together by the way that he spoke about things in the narration in chapter 1 that doesn't actually come through in real life, it seems like, but in later chapters it becomes really obvious with the way that he talks about things. It's like this guy's probably autistic, so there's some special stuff going on there. Maybe that will be an aspect of the book, or maybe that's just something that I'm inserting into his character because I happen to be autistic and talk about certain stuff to a passionate degree that way. Hal literally reads and memorizes the dictionary. Like, I'm pretty sure no non-autistic person is going to do that. Just like, sorry, that's probably the truth. But there's also some other interesting aspects about Hal's character that just really kind of raise up some questions. At the end of chapter 1, he kind of like has a freak out, or it's implied that he has a freak out based on everybody else's reaction. So like you don't exactly know what happened, but like that's kind of what this first chapter is. It seems like every other chapter that has happened up at this point takes place before this one, not just Hal's chapters, but like everything else as well. It seems like it's taking place a little bit before this. To be fair, this first chapter I think is like on April 1st of this year of the dependable undergarment. I don't remember for sure. Maybe this is a little bit later in the timeline. Like I said, it's kind of hard to piece some things together. It's not all entirely clear right now, but the main thing that struck me with the first chapter was how easy it was to read and how enjoyable the prose was and how interesting it was to be in the head of this character. It was a fun time. You already see a lot of hints of sort of the satire of America, the satire of people, the satire of just the general vibe, the tone of the book. So like there's a little bit of satire going into this book. I don't think all of it is meant to be like a sort of funny haha type of satire, because that, funny enough, that isn't actually what satire is. I think most people get the idea that sites like Babylon Bee or The Onion, you know, these sites that are satire sites and are primarily comedic and humorous in tone, that's what satire is. No, satire is actually like taking something that is like, you know, not too far from the truth, or creating something that seems like it could be the truth but isn't, and using that absurdity to make a point. It doesn't have to be humorous. It often is, because that's the easiest way to make a point, but things can be really grim in satire as well. And I think that the depiction of real humans in this book has actually been really good so far, and not all of that is meant to be satirical, but there are definitely little hints at that throughout, I will say. Chapter 2 was the one that really struck me as really good. Like I mentioned earlier, just briefly, in as spoiler-free context as I could, the depiction of addiction in this book was very well done in this chapter, using just 2 paragraphs through an entire 10-page chapter, and still making it very readable, very engrossing, very easy to follow, and kind of like almost gross and dirty in how real it felt. It's just like, yeah, I know someone who like kind of has this kind of thing going on with their life, and like I pity that person, and if this is the way that that person happens to think about some of this stuff, like I really pity that person. It's a chapter about a person who's trying to quit weed, trying to quit smoking, trying to quit this drug addiction, and goes so far as to tell every single dealer, every single person who ever gives them drugs, do not ever give me drugs again, and also tries to excuse his buying drugs from them in the first place. Is like, oh, I'm buying it for other people, so like don't make it too urgent, it doesn't matter. This chapter is just one of those moments. He's asked this woman to, you know, give him a supply, supposedly for, ostensibly, a word that's been used a few times in this book, for other people, but actually for him. But like she's late, so like he's stressing and he's anxious about this, and he goes through this process every time he gets this drug, that he resets his answering machine and like prepares everybody, just like, I'm going to be unavailable for a little while, so that when he gets the weed, he can just spend several days like being a nothing, being a literal piece of nothing, just being high for several days constantly, including in this chapter where he considers like, maybe I'll smoke so much of it so quickly that like I'll never want to smoke it again, and maybe that will finally help me kick the habit. Like there's a real back and forth, a bickering with himself, an argument about how he's going to quit this drug, but like being unable to fully quit it. It's a very, very interesting picture that is being painted with this chapter, and I found it to be super compelling. This character in this plotline hasn't come back into the story so far as of where I'm at, but it was a very good chapter nonetheless, and I think probably my favorite up to this point. If not, it's definitely up there. Chapters 3 and 4 seem to be a little bit shorter. Chapter 3, we jump back a few years to a younger version of Hal, which, like I said, I suspected in the first chapter that Hal had to be heavily autistic. This third chapter seems to confirm that a little bit. The chapter also gets a little bit confusing and strange, kind of not in the same way that chapter 1 does, but like in a similar vein, in that like you're not entirely sure what exactly happens. In some regards, there's some weird stuff going on that like this doesn't seem like it was actually fully real, and depending on the year of stuff, like maybe it was an April Fool's prank, because this chapter takes place on April 1st of whatever year it takes place in. So like there's some questioning going on there with Hal's character, but it's hard to tell what is actually real and what's just in his head, and what's like, you know, aspect of unreliable narration, what aspect is like actually true. You know, there's a lot of question marks to be had there. Chapter 4 was just one page immediately followed, and was also something that like I couldn't really comment on, and that I don't really remember very much of, because you know, it's just kind of one of those things, just introducing another something that's like, okay, how does this fit into the storyline? I don't know where this fits or what this is saying, but I guess I enjoyed reading it, question mark kind of thing. There's been a couple of those moments in the book so far. Chapter 4 is probably the least memorable chapter for that reason of it being short, not really having anything too much of substance for me at that point. Chapter 5 seemed to pick up the length just a tiny bit. Let me see if I can find my notes on that. There it is. Chapter 5 was a little bit more of a dense chapter. It introduced 3 new POVs on its own. 3 new POVs, 3 new storylines set in different times of the book. The first POV is one that has appeared now and again. It is from the POV of an attaché from Canada staying in Boston. Somebody who is primarily concerned about something called entertainment. That seems to be his job, is like doing something with entertainment, basically. You know, like film or TV, entertainment, like entertainment stuff is where his job is resolved. I don't know exactly what it is that he does in that sphere, but that is something that he does. And I knew going into the book that entertainment, quote unquote entertainment, was going to be a big thing in the book, so I was keeping my eye on the plot line, and it has turned out to be a relatively important thing moving forward. We get another couple moments sprinkled throughout several chapters through the rest of the book where you figure out that this man gets a package in the mail that has some undisclosed entertainment in it. He's just like, okay, whatever, I'll try it. He puts it in, and he's so engrossed by it that he can't stop watching it, and he's found a way to basically infinitely loop this entertainment so that like he never has to stop watching it. He just like dies, I guess, doing this, like gets so absorbed into this that it's kind of like a coma or death, whatever it is. I don't know the technical aspects of what's actually happening there, but like that's kind of the implication of what happens as we get more and more scenes with that. And I say scenes, but it's literally just like a paragraph now and again that goes back to this. You see that his wife comes back and also becomes engrossed, and various other neighbors and other people walk in and do that, and people who are sent to check on him, including police, or like walk in and just like see all these people staring at something, and they can't help themselves, just like, what are these people looking at? They look, and then they're engrossed too. So like so many people are caught up in this, and I can't remember the number. Was it 28 people? It might have been a different number. I might just be thinking 28 because that's how many chapters are in the book, but a good number of people are engrossed by this entertainment, which was introduced in chapter 5. As I predicted reading that book, I was like, this is probably going to be important. It turned out being important sooner than I thought. So like there's something going on there, which we'll discuss a little bit later. Very interesting material. The next POV introduced in chapter 5 it's kind of weird to read. It was like a weird sort of southern-ish, maybe kind of southern western type of dialect that was going on. It was a bit hard to read and piece together, had no relevance to anything else in the story in my mind, so I didn't really get or understand exactly what was going on there. I'm sure it'll come back and be a little bit more important later. And then the third POV that was introduced was a brief description of like some sort of relationship between people called Mildred Bonk and Bruce Green. So again, like a very short POV, I think just a couple pages this one was. Again, hard to really say the relevance of it. These second and third POVs are even now still irrelevant to the plot in a way that like I'm not sure where they fit, and I don't remember a whole lot about them specifically, but I still enjoyed reading what was in them. That's been the trend with the book, even when I haven't fully understood the purpose of a POV or had a hard time understanding what happened in a specific scene. I've been enjoying the reading process anyway. It's been very cool. So basically by the end of chapter 5, you get the idea that this book is going to have a ton of very separate and disparate plot lines and characters that you kind of have to keep track of, many of which you'll maybe forget before they come back again, as I've kind of forgotten with some of these plot lines as well, until they start to converge, and we'll see what happens when they do actually converge. That'll be a very interesting thing to see indeed. Chapter 6 was another part of it back to Hal's POV again, and also based on the text, apparently the same evening as chapter 3. It seems like, I think, it reveals that Hal's father has at some point died, which also makes part of chapter 3 with sort of stuff happening with Hal's father in his mind that like seems like it might have just been Hal's mind, so like maybe he's a little bit crazy, like there's some confusing aspects here going on. The second part of chapter 6 was from Oren's POV, who is one of Hal and Cadenza's brother, and we learn a little bit later that Hal's father is named James Oren in Cadenza, so Oren is obviously named after his father. The Oren portion was rather dense narration. It took a little while for me to work through that one. Had a lot of long and complicated sentences with crazy structure that were actually a little difficult to read. It also takes place somewhere around the same time as most of the other scenes in this year, it seems like, and also incorporates some other aspects of another character that might be transfixed with entertainment to some interesting degree as well. We also get little bits and pieces about drugs and stuff. I believe this first part of chapter 6 had a few pages specifically on drugs with Hal and how he prefers to take drugs and stuff like that, and the way that like tennis players in general will take certain drugs before a match to kind of get them hyped up and help, you know, their reaction speed or whatever, but then take other drugs after a tennis match so that they can calm down and cool off, so to speak. Very interesting dynamic going on with all of this. Chapter 7 was an example of me just really appreciating Wallace's prose. The first part of chapter 7 was truly splendid for me to read, as my notes say, and also enlightening in the way that endnotes are going to be utilized in the book, because up to chapter 7, only a couple of endnotes have been used so far. There's like 400 or so endnotes in the entire book, and only a few had been used up until the point of chapter 7. Chapter 7 is where several more are used, and I actually lied a little bit. It wasn't the chapter 6 part with Hal that talks about drug stuff. It's chapter 7 that talks about drug stuff primarily, and how it is that people use them. I remember this because chapter 7 has several endnotes about certain drugs, where there's like a very specific paragraph. I don't know why this stuck out to me so well, but there's a specific paragraph that's like complicated to read, and like the sentence structure seems to make no sense, but like several of the terms have endnotes, so it's just like, okay, like what does this even mean? I read the sentence once, doesn't make any sense. I read the sentence again, and then read the endnotes. It's like, okay, I read the sentence once, it makes no sense. I read the endnotes applying to the various terms throughout the paragraph. It's like, okay, so I have a little bit more of an idea of what's going on. These are descriptions for certain drugs and how some of them are used, and like how different types are utilized and what effects different types have. Okay, that's cool. Now let's reread the paragraph again. I reread the paragraph with the context, just like, okay, I'm still a little confused. I reread the paragraph one final time, taking that note right where it's shown, like this drug term, endnote, read the endnote, and then reread that part of the sentence, go on to the next clause and do the same thing, and suddenly the paragraph and that whole sentence made perfect sense and actually like was very good as such. It's one of those things where it's just like, yeah, without the endnotes this actually makes no sense if you have no clue what's being talked about. If you have an idea of what's being talked about, it makes a little bit of a sense, and it's good. If you actually use it, like take the context of those endnotes and apply them to the book, it makes really good sense. It's one of those enlightening moments about the book that was just like, wow, yeah, this is fun. This is really good. This is enjoyable to read. Surprisingly, despite the endnotes being a little bit cumbersome, or the requirement of them being a little bit cumbersome, the placement and the context entirely just kind of made that really enjoyable. Chapter 7 was mostly just a great display of writing, but the way that it opens the mind, and my mind personally, about how certain different drugs are utilized and the different types there are, and what kind of what kind of differences different families of even like prescription drugs and whatnot have is such a fascinating idea, because like drugs is not something that I've ever personally been interested in. I've always judged heavily anybody who's ever participated in recreational drug use, especially if they're teenagers and like in high school or anything like that. Kind of thing just always really bugs me. Seeing the way that it's displayed in this book makes it very obvious that Foster has probably a little bit more experience with this than one might have wished that he would have had, but has created a very enlightening picture to paint, for these characters with drug problems. And it's fascinating. It's just fascinating to me as somebody who knows nothing about that stuff and generally has never been interested in it. Chapter 8, however, was one that was very good. It was a very short chapter. Both chapters 8 and 9 are pretty short. Let's first talk about a couple pieces of that. Chapter 8 is primarily notable in its use of a 10-page endnote, and keep in mind the endnotes use a smaller font than the main pages, so these 10 pages of endnotes were more like 15 pages of regular prose. This endnote in chapter 8 was entirely a filmography of James Oren Incandenza, so Hal's and Oren's and another character, Mario Incandenza's father, who seem to be into making sort of experimental and sort of strange type of films. There's all of these pages in the very end of the book that just has a ton of films. Like, most of these don't matter. Most of them have goofy and strange names. There's plenty of satirical stuff here as well. That was a little bit fun, but I found myself super engrossed in the process of reading it. As dull and tedious as reading this filmography, for example, was, I found myself really enjoying the process anyway, because I kept reading every line, just like, there's something here, like some of these references are going to be important and make sense. One of the primary things that I noted with chapter 8 was something that we learn a little bit more about later, in that Infinite Jest is not just the title of the book, it is the title of a film that James Oren Incandenza, Hal's father, made. And by made, we mean that he made like 5 different versions of it. And like the 5th version is supposedly the final version that like has dubious confirmation of existence, we'll say. Nobody really knows how long it is, what it is. Nobody knows if it was ever finished. Some people say it's unfinished. Some people say it was finished but never released. There's a lot of questions associated with it on account of James Oren Incandenza dying during the post-production process of this film. But I feel like we can pretty safely infer that Infinite Jest, as a result of certain things implied here, as well as through the rest of the book, that Infinite Jest might just be the entertainment, an entertainment that is meant to sort of like addict people, be a sort of satirical take on addiction, insofar as not just a drug type of addiction, but addiction to entertainment generally speaking. I think it is the entertainment that was sent to the attaché back in chapter 5 that we see all these people get addicted to, and just, keep watching until they like are induced in a coma or killed, because they're just so engrossed by it. A piece of entertainment that is so entertaining that like people just die watching it or something. I don't know, like I said, the technical aspects of that, but some really interesting material there nonetheless. It's just a really, really fascinating idea, some of the stuff that's going on. Like I said, I think I'm making inferences and assumptions, I believe, in suggesting that Infinite Jest is probably this piece of entertainment, but I think that's what it is. I think that's what's being pointed to, especially with that filmography being such a big endnote so early on, the first really long endnote, and being a key point in certain other things that happen with that attaché plotline, like I said, and kind of popping up now and again with a paragraph, suggesting that more and more people are getting trapped by this entertainment. And then another scene later on that we get in some later chapters with the meeting of a couple different firms that are like, seem to probably be like a central point of the plot line. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, where people suggest that like there's a specific group of people, the AFR, I think, a terrorist group that was probably suggested at being responsible for sending this entertainment to the attaché and causing all these casualties as a result. Very fascinating thing. I think this plotline is going to be central to the book, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. one of the things that I wanted to talk about as a result of the first 6.3% of the book, so basically chapters 8 or all the way up through chapter 9 or so, seeing the hints and breadcrumbs of the incandenza family relations and placement in the narrative is fun, even if not all of the scenes make total sense. This is something that I've been trying to say in this video. Not everything makes sense. I don't think it has to make sense, but piecing together little bits of stuff to try to make sense of what is there and just enjoying the good scenes that are there, the scenes that do make sense in and of themselves, is something that I've been having a really good time with. I'm also surprised at the depth to which Wallace talks about drugs at various points of the book. Most of it flies relatively over my head, like I said, because I've never been inclined toward drug use, but the strength of the characters being built across disparate settings and points of the timeline is really working for me so far. Moving on to chapter 10, which was a big one after chapters 8 and 9 were very small. The second half of chapter 10 I had a hard time getting much out of because certain characters like Stitt and the whole segment was written quite oddly, because the dynamic between Stitt and Mario and Cadenza as like characters in this scene was a little bit hard for me to really grasp and make an understanding of. It intrigued me, but I'm not entirely sure where that's going to fall in the timeline yet so far. Similarly, not entirely sure with some of the stuff that happened in chapter 10 with Tiny Yule, but I guess we'll find out more about that in time as well, probably. But the primary thing about chapter 10 that I want to talk about that I enjoyed so much was the first half of it. Chapter 10 was very memorable, where a psych ward essentially is concerned with a psychiatric doctor and a very, very depressed woman, maybe girl. I don't know how old this woman is, but there's a character named Kate and a psychiatric doctor interacting in the psych ward of a hospital, discussing depression and anxiety and the way there are different degrees of suicidal ideation, particularly as a topic, was super well done in this chapter. I related super well because my old high school self was not in a good place, and always had a hard time explaining to people that there are different degrees of suicidal ideation or tendencies. There are like the sides where it's like actually just wanting to die. There are the side of it just wanting to not be in pain. There's the side of it of actual self-harm and just wanting to be in pain to remember that you are capable of feeling something. Like, there are several different degrees of where some of this ideation comes into play, and the first half of chapter 10 definitely talks about that quite heavily and does so very well. The way that addiction and drugs weaves into the storyline, as well as it seems it's playing into basically every storyline of the book so far, was also quite engrossing and enriching and fascinating, just like everything else. I know I've said fascinating a lot, but it really has been that way for me, especially as somebody who, like I said, lived through one of the examples of depression and really negative thought processes back not too many years ago, all things considered. My brain was very tired after reading chapter 10. Chapter 11 is what I've read most recently, and I think was incredibly well done, despite there being a lot going on in it. Chapter 11 first gives us an introduction to the endnote 304, which is another long endnote, but one that it seems a lot of other endnotes refer to because of this terrorist group, the AFR, I believe. It seems like, as I said before, this is going to be a thing that is central to the entire narrative of Infinite Jest, because this terrorist organization is sort of accused with sending the entertainment to some of the people that caused some of these casualties. Seems like there's weird stuff going on there, but there's also a lot of other stuff going on with trains in this endnote that seems like it'll be important at some point in time that is referenced throughout the chapter. That was kind of interesting. Most of what chapter 11 is doing is kind of a back and forth between various different scenes with Hal and some other people, but then there's also mostly a lot of scenes with somebody from the AFR. I believe that's the place. Let me look up something just real quick. Yeah, it is the AFR and the BSS. So whatever these two terms fully stand for, one of them is completely in French. I forget what the other one is at all. One representative from both these places are having a meeting together. There's a lot of like sort of sub-political stuff going on here that is really intricate, and like I don't think I can explain it very well. There's a lot going on there. There's some stuff going on with the AFR that I've already talked about. The BSS is kind of like having some sort of weird relationship going on here, because the AFR agent is like pretending to betray itself with the other side because of like stuff that the AFR agent's wife is going through, but there's like also some real betrayal going on. Like I said, like a lot of like confusing, intricate stuff that's really hard to explain there. But most of what the plot is in that scene, essentially, even though that scene's split across various different points, is explaining a little bit of the context of what's going on in the world, the sort of dynamic between some of these organizations, and realizing it's really just hard to explain. Mostly for me, it was realizing that this plot line is probably going to be central to the entire narrative. I don't think it's the main plot line. I don't think it's these are the main characters. I think Hal is the main character, and I think that plot line is going to be the one that takes, the vast majority of the page count in the book. But this plotline is going to be central to how different things happen and what big events occur, and what the stuff with the entertainment, with the titular Infinite Jest is concerned. Like, there's a lot of stuff there that I'm excited to read a little bit more about. Chapter 11 was mostly just good in making me realize that things are actually slowly starting to come together already so early on, even though 99% of the book so far has just been expositional and some of it unrelated material that is kind of hard to place in terms of importance, but a lot of it is also just very good to read anyway, and I'm sure there's still a whole lot more exposition to come, a whole lot more to read in that front, but like starting to see some little pieces come together and being able to make theories and understanding that like I can piece together some of this stuff is just really fun and enjoyable nonetheless. The rest of chapter 11, one of the main things that I want to know is that like some more of the stuff happening at the tennis academy is some of the more straightforward stuff happening in the book so far, but I've really enjoyed all of it. One of the things that we see a little bit is like the big buddy system, where some of the older high school students at the tennis academy are each in charge of several younger students from the academy, from different grades, from different portions of the group, kids that are younger, not quite as good at playing tennis, and just being kind of like mentors, helping them through certain things. And you see there's a section of chapter 11 that kind of bounces between some of these big buddies and how they kind of interact with the younger students, teaching them lessons, teaching them things about not just tennis, but about the school and about life. Hal's way of teaching people and the way that he kind of enjoys being a big buddy, and the way that he talks about community in terms of these tennis students was interesting from Hal's perspective, because he's like, well, tennis is a very individual sport. You're fighting each other basically to be on top, but we're also kind of a community here because we're all exhausted. We all have to find something that we share together so that we don't just hate every minute of being around everybody and being in school. Like, there's some community here. We're building that. There's some other stuff going on with some of the other big buddies that was interesting. I would say one of my favorite parts of the chapter was learning, some life lessons about plateauing, different types of people who reach plateaus in life, not just in tennis as it applies in this book, but in other stuff as well, in various other aspects of life for real people, whether it's like a hobby or a career or a relationship or whatever. You have like a big exponential growth, but then you kind of hit a plateau, and you have various different people who react differently to that. You have people who think that like that plateau is like that's where you're at, that's where you're comfortable, you get complacent, that's what happens. But then other people get above your level, people who you were above and better at before, but you just stay at this plateau because you're not continuing to grow. You just hit that point and that's where you stop. You have other people who use that and just like, oh no, I'm not seeing growth, I'm not seeing more growth, I'm not seeing any upward trajectory here, this is bad, and they kind of like start panicking and like overdo their attempt to continue to grow and therefore start to plummet a little bit. And that's how certain people react to plateauing. And then you have other people who react a little bit more appropriately, but perhaps more in despair. They hit a plateau and it's just like, oh, is this all the growth that I'm capable of? And then they just like kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy, is just like not doing enough to try to grow a little bit more, like just life lesson stuff. I really enjoyed that aspect of chapter 11. Unfortunately, not a whole lot of like really satisfying answers to any questions or any theories that I have so far to talk about, because like I said, I'm maybe like halfway through the exposition of the book so far. So like there's still a ton of this thing left. I have, as of where I am currently at, I have 1,000 150 pages left or something like that. So I still have a very much of the book remaining left to me. Maybe not quite that much, maybe closer to just 1,000 pages left, but either way, like, it's still a lot. That said, this video is very long, much longer than I was anticipating it being, but when you have so much to talk about, like, that's just how it's going to be. I don't foresee any of the future diaries for this book being any shorter, because I'm going to try to read as much as I can, as quickly as I can, because I'm just so engrossed in this book. And because, you know, as more things happen, as more crazy stuff goes down, like, I'm gonna have to find some way to try to talk about this without going crazy and while trying to get the stuff on the page. As is, this video is probably not going to be quite the hour long that the recording is, because of the first like 10 minutes I'm probably cutting more than half of that, just because like false starts and getting off track and stuff. But like, either way, I'm enjoying the book so far. If you are as well, up to the point that I'm at or even further, I'm really excited to catch up to you. I'm not going to catch up to you. This is going to take me months to do, but I hope if you are somebody who picked up the book specifically so that you could read along and kind of have some of these discussions, let me know what some of your thoughts are in the comments below. I can't wait to read some of them, and I hope some people in the future who have read the book or who have been reading the book at, you know, just randomly, maybe click on this video and try to, you know, get some other interpretation, some other influence in how they're reading the book, just because of my journey through it and having a really enjoyable time so far, and I can't wait to continue. With that being said, I don't really have much more to say. I'm just really curious to find out more. I'm not entirely sure when the next one of these diaries will be, but it'll probably be in about a month or so. I'm not entirely sure how much of the book I'm going to be able to read in that time. It'll probably be a couple hundred more pages. I will of course include at the very beginning of the video, or at least at the beginning of the next spoiler section, about how far I'm in. Like I said, I'm in right now about 12% of the book. I anticipate that I'll probably be maybe close to 30% by the time the next one of these diaries comes out. We'll see. I certainly hope I'm further than not. Either way, whatever my next video is on the channel, I hope you stick around for that if you want. Otherwise, the next one of these diaries, like I said, will be in a month. I'll get out of your face now. Regardless of what the next video is, I'll be back next time.